How much do you agree with the saying that AI will take all our jobs?
I actually have been covering AI for about 10 years, maybe even 11. AI does already influence your life, even if you don't realize it. The mayor's office essentially created a list of mostly boys, but children, young people, who they said were going to go on to commit a crime in the future.
Okay, I'm talking to a chatbot, a set of code, like I would to my friend. I'm like, actually, could you make it more? So I'm addressing it as you.
In the short term, to be direct and answer your question, there will be jobs that will go to it. There was a case where Amazon was using a hiring algorithm, right, to screen CVs for a job. And the way it did that was to see if you're on women's sports teams in your CV. So if there was like women's cricket or women's football, then it was screening those CVs out as a proxy for essentially
Because
screening women.
That earlier Amazon would have rejected those.
Yeah, because it was doing more men, it was hiring more men than women. They designated a whole bunch of people who are essentially enemies of the state, and that included religious people, it included college lecturers and teachers, included anybody who they felt were going to speak out against them, and they were using data to find these people and disappear them essentially. Many dozens of these people were killed.
Hello and welcome to Do I Like It, a show जहाँ हम हर बात पे बात करते हैं. And in this episode, I have somebody who has joined us from London, right?
Yes.
She is the artificial intelligence editor at the Financial Times. We, of course, have Madhumita Murgia.
Yes.
And I just learned that her last name is not Indian.
Exactly.
Right? Yes.
My husband is Italian, but it somehow sounds a bit Indian.
Yeah.
So.
Okay. So we are here to talk about her book, Code Dependent. First of all, who came up with this name, man?
Do you like it?
I love it.
Then it's my idea.
I am a sucker for great puns, and this is one of them.
That's great. Yeah, I think for some people puns work, right?
Yeah.
And for some they don't. But I thought this kind of captured actually the essence of the book. But yeah, it was my idea, I'll admit it.
So as the name suggests, the book is about living in the shadow of AI. What does it mean to be human in this age of AI?
Yeah, so I actually have been covering AI for about 10 years, maybe even 11. So I was very early to this. And at the time, there was really no hype around it. It was much more niche, maverick, kind of like crazy, fringy kind of stuff. And when I started out, it was, starting to enter social media. And the way most people would have known about it was through the recommendation algorithms that we see. So the posts that are recommended, the ads that are targeted to us on Instagram or whatever, and on Spotify and Netflix, when they recommend what we should watch, what we should listen to, all of that stuff is powered by AI. The goal of the book was to say, here are all the ways AI is already part of your life. Yeah. You might not realize it, but when it comes to, getting a loan from your bank, when it comes to, as I said, social media recommendation systems, when you order something through an app, all of these interactions are powered by AI. It's increasingly part of government services. Globally, you can see it as part in criminal justice. Judges and lawyers are using it to decide what type of sentences to give to people. And so it's so ubiquitous. And so the goal was to kind of humanize that and show how it's part of our lives. But while I was doing that, as ChatGPT sort of exploded, it became much more urgent and relevant, right? Because now people get that there are AI products, we can interact with them, and more people are doing so around the world. They are talking to chatbots. Now people are directly interacting with AI systems. It's not that it's through an app or that it's touching them in an indirect
it's not
way.
In the back end anymore.
Exactly. It's come to the front. And when you're talking to a chatbot, you are literally, talking to an AI system, right, for the first time. And when it's generating responses, that's fully, AI generated.
This reminds me of something I was using ChatGPT for, and I needed some suggestions for a title and a description, SEO text and all. And it gave me some answers that I wasn't too happy with. So, like when we text some friend of ours, we write the word actually I want to do. So I wrote that to a chatbot. And I realized, okay, I'm talking to a chatbot, a set of code, like I would to my friend. I'm like, actually, could you make it more? So I'm addressing it as you.
Yeah, I think that's one big change. You said what's changed in the recent past, and I'd say the big change with generative AI, which is the type of AI which generates words, images, music, audio, video. We've increasingly seen that over the past year or two. Is that people are treating it like it's human in a way, and it's because it can talk to us in our own language, right? And people are using it as mentors, as therapists,
Yeah, so
as
we
even friends.
do a podcast called Big Story, and there we did an episode with a company which provides AI therapy, right? So, I mean, some of the most intimate human relationships are now infiltrated by AI, right?
Absolutely.
So, just for a layman understanding, can you explain to us how AI works?
Yeah.
If somebody doesn't know what it is, but obviously they've heard of chat GPT, AI, हर चीज में आ गया है. How does AI work?
Sure. So this is a very good question because AI isn't just one thing.
Exactly.
So artificial intelligence is the name came out, or people came up with it in the 1950s. And the way I see it, it was,
I believe it was a science fiction term at first, right?
yeah, so there was also the term cybernetics was the other option, but there was this conference in Boston and they kind of decided, they agreed that they were going to call it artificial intelligence. And I think it was more of an aspirational name than really what it is. Today, it's pretty much a marketing term that refers to any statistical software. So this is applied statistics essentially.
Yeah,
and the
mentioned in the book. That
Exactly. And basically, the way it works is it needs a huge amount of data.
Okay.
And so, say we take something like a language model, which is the model that powers a chatbot, like ChatGPT. It has to generate words. But to learn how to do that, you have to train it on millions, billions of words that others have written, and that's mostly been taken from the internet. So everything from news stories to YouTube comments to Reddit posts to reviews and etc. Everything that we post online has been scraped, and these systems are trained on these words. And because it's a statistical predictive system, it can look at the words and then start to predict the relationships between things and find patterns in that data. And that applies to essentially any AI system.
coming to the book from this point that you made, I was just glossing through the contents page, and it really caught my attention that all the chapters are like your livelihood, your body, your identity, and basically all the chapters are about how AI will influence, or actually how AI does influence your health, your freedom, your safety net, your boss.
Yeah.
How did you decide that, okay, I want to structure the book like this?
Like I said, the goal was to bring stories to people that showed how, as you said, AI does already influence your life, even if you don't realize it. And of course, it can become more sophisticated and it can evolve, and it will maybe have different abilities and capabilities moving forward. But today, it's already in use all over the world and across all these different sectors, from work to healthcare to government services. And so for me, it was, how do I humanize this? And the reason I wanted to kind of call those chapters, as you said, your identity, your body, your health, is because this could be any of us. These are ordinary people from 9 countries around the world, many of which I travel to. They're not necessarily entrepreneurs or CEOs or scientists. They are, single mother in Amsterdam, or Uber Eats cyclist in Pittsburgh, or human rights activist in China.
The data labelers from Nairobi. That was
Exactly.
I think, the biggest. Like, of course, I knew about a lot of these things with respect to gig workers and with respect to how it's being used in healthcare. But I think it was the first chapter, right?
Yeah.
Your livelihood.
Exactly.
And it reminded me of modern times Charlie Chaplin like scenario where like there's a couple of workers who are like working at a factory line or something.
Yeah, like the puppet masters behind AI. Yeah.
What was the most fascinating story out of all of these people?
It's like choosing between your kids, right? I don't think that you can. The story in Amsterdam of the
400 list.
Exactly. It was called the Top 400, where the mayor's office essentially created a list of mostly boys, but children, young people, who they said were going to go on to commit a crime in the future.
Yeah.
And for me, that really felt like sci-fi, like, Minority Report, the film, if people have seen, where you had these precogs who were like predicting who's going to do crimes in the future. This was like that, but using algorithms and these systems to essentially predict. And what I also found surprising, and I learned through the book, is it's not always bad people doing bad things. It's not the point that either the companies are evil or the technology is terrible and should be rolled back or should be kind of paused. It's not about that. Often it's good intentions going wrong. It's poor guardrails put in place. It's trusting technology too much and kind of usurping the power and agency of human experts.
What's the problem in having an algorithm that can tell me people who are going to, become criminals at one point in time? Or the story that was from India, where AI algorithms are being used to detect diseases that normal diagnosis would not be able to. So where do you draw that balance between the good that it has and some of the problems that it might pose?
I think that this is why we talk about ethics in AI, right? Because I think we all understand red lines when we see them. So, for example, I think many would agree that completely automating a massive weapon system to decide who to target and kill, probably not great. Is happening today already. There are, in many weapon systems around the world, they are being increasingly automated. They are creating target lists and essentially cutting humans out of the loop. So you can see the ethical issues there. There's predicting individuals who might commit a crime. You have to be 100% sure that that's going to be right. Because otherwise, what if it says you're going to do it?
Exactly.
Are you?
So even one person who's sort of wrongly
and no statistical system is ever going to be 100% correct. None. No human is ever 100% correct, and definitely AIs aren't. Often humans, with all sorts of computer systems, we tend to trust. We have automation bias. I think it's an innate human thing to trust that the machine is correct, or usually more than a human is.
That we don't understand.
Exactly. And we've seen this with pilots in planes. We've seen this with guards who tend to trust cameras over themselves. You can see why it helps to kind of police at scale. But I think the longer term issue there becomes what if the definition of criminal changes. Today, maybe we all agree who that is, but in my Argentina chapter, for example, I mentioned in the 70s they had a dictatorship through the southern Latin American countries in Chile, Colombia, and Argentina. And at that time, they designated a whole bunch of people who are essentially enemies of the state. And that included religious people. It included college lecturers and teachers. It included anybody who they felt were going to speak out against them. And they were using data to find these people and disappear them. Essentially, many dozens of these people were killed. Not saying that's going to happen elsewhere, but the point is, yes, you're safe until you no longer are. And it's more about, do we want a society where everybody is constantly surveilled, where you go out into public and you're no longer anonymous and you no longer have a private life?
But is it then a matter of time that these AI systems will get more and more accurate, or the inaccuracies and the mistakes and the biases are the nature of the beast?
That's a really good question. I think both are true. They will get better.
If the more data you provide, the more diverse data you provide, the better the.
It's not always that one-to-one, but largely, at least with today's language models like the chatbot systems, so far they believe that the more data you have, the capabilities are scaling, but it's not a done deal. This is something they're still working on researching. It's very much evolving day to day. But that's not true of all types of decision making systems, that the more data you throw into it, the better it gets. Sometimes you need better data, not just more data.
And what's the distinction between?
So more data could just be a whole bunch of like rubbish, right? So the kind of phrase with AI is garbage in, garbage out. So you can put in a whole bunch of like messy, corrupted data, like bad images or photos, and that's more data, but that's not necessarily high quality. That's not representative across, say, different gender, ethnicity, and so on. So that doesn't mean the system is going to get better. Better data means you don't actually need more volume, but you could have better quality data that's clean, that's more targeted, and so on. And so, I think that the capabilities, as I said, will get better, but at the same time, they're never going to be perfect. And because they reflect society, they are always going to have the same biases that we have in our society.
So from what I gathered, this is not a anti-AI book.
No.
This is a more pro-responsible AI.
Yeah, it's a realist take. I think here's what it's like right now. Here is where it falls down, where it fails. Here are the amazing opportunities as well, like in healthcare, as you said. That's an amazing example of how it can fill a gap that today we don't have enough humans to do. We don't have enough humans to care for everybody. So how can we augment that care with AI?
One thing that I even noticed in a lot of these chapters is the lack of a general framework of adjusting AI in our current economy, adjusting AI in our current legal system. So
absolutely.
What position are we in as people to integrate? Do we have legal frameworks in place? Are some countries doing better than others? What's that zone like?
Yeah, that's really astute observation in terms of us not being ready to integrate it, because that is true. The speed with which, not just the speed of development, people talk a lot about, AI is changing so quickly, but it's not just the technology. What's changing is that it's being integrated into our lives very quickly. Like already, between Microsoft and Google, it's touching billions. Microsoft has already rolled out Copilot into its into its productivity apps, which how many of us use Excel, Word, PowerPoint, right? Similarly, Google is rolling it out. So it's already touching people who don't necessarily understand it and who are already starting to play around with it. And as you say, without anything in place on regulation and on the legal side. On the legal side, you have the copyright question, right? Who owns all the data that was used to train this stuff? Things, maybe your videos, maybe my newspaper articles. So that's an open question currently. And then on the regulation front, I think it's catching up pretty quickly. Europe, the EU has already got the EU AI Act, so they are probably the most further ahead in terms of having some framework in place. But India, the US, the UK, China, of course, has also. Everybody has started talking about what are their priorities. I think in India, there's been discussion around deep fakes and the rules applied to that around. Political advertising, for example. And so, there are various discussions around different aspects of AI, and I think regulation will catch up with it pretty soon.
Don't you think that there also needs to be an incentive for these tech companies to be involved in these decision making? How involved do they want to be in these questions of AI ethics?
So, on the regulation front, they're pretty involved. They all have lobbying teams. In US Congress, in Brussels, in the EU, they are very active. In India too, I think social media companies have been here for many years and they are pretty well acquainted with the Indian government over the years. On the ethics front, I think increasingly they do realize they have a responsibility to put out good quality systems since they are being used by many millions of people, if not billions, right? And AI ethics isn't like some theoretical study of AI. It means, it means how is it being responsibly applied in our lives. If our kids are using AI at school, to write essays or to answer questions, is it giving them appropriate answers? Are those answers safe? or how do we even know if it's age appropriate, right? There's literally no rules currently, and it's being used by everybody from kids to to adults, like the whole spectrum. So I think they are fully aware that they can't afford to put out systems that randomly spew out hate speech or say things that are age inappropriate and so on. So they do have teams working on this. But I guess ultimately, they are private companies, they are enterprises, and their motive is profit. So that's, unsurprisingly has to be their focus. How do we sell this, get it into as many hands as possible, create a bigger market for it, and fund more and more of it. So you can't just leave it to them. Yes, they are building it and they can help on the technical front, but I think we do need to have participation and expertise from other parts of the economy and society who have experience holding technologies to account. Everyone from people in public policy to journalists. If it's medical systems, doctors and nurses.
How much do you agree with the saying that AI will take all our jobs?
It's not the first time technology has automated tasks or jobs ever since, I guess, the Industrial Revolution, where machines were used in factories instead of human workers and so on. And so this isn't new in that respect. I guess the difference is, whereas previously technologies were automating manual tasks, this has now entered the white collar area, where always, white collar workers thought we are safe because, what we can do, which is kind of the intellectual work of writing or being a lawyer or a doctor, of course, a machine can never do that. That's changed now, right? Because we do have AI systems.
Understanding that, there's no limitations essentially.
Yeah, it's not that they are human or conscious, but they are powerful enough, and they're powerful enough that they can assist for sure in the job of a doctor, of a lawyer, of a management consultant, of a customer service call center rep, of a journalist, right? And so that's that's what scares people. But I think so, and I think in the short term, to be direct and answer your question, there will be jobs that will go to it. It's a cheaper way. Instead of, you can save costs using an AI system, you will. But I think in the medium to long term, we'll just see new jobs, or the jobs that we do will evolve. Just because accountants can use Excel spreadsheets now, whereas before that they were doing everything by hand, doesn't mean we don't have accountants. They just do things differently, and they use it as a tool. So I think that it will be an assistive tool. It might do some aspects of our work that today we do ourselves, like, I don't know, transcription or translation, maybe do a rough draft of something, summarize transcription, something like that. But for the kind of highest quality work that any professionals do, the best customer service people or the best journalists, artists, etc., lawyers, you're always going to need somebody who's going to join the dots and, essentially spot the ideas that are not obvious, which
and
AI currently...
Something like that AI
can't
do in general, like...
Not today. So I think it's very good at certain specific tasks, but when it comes to being original, to sort of knowing what's a good story, or
by nature it's not original, right?
It's not.
If it's trained on everything that came before.
It's predictive. So it's predicting based on what it already knows, and it might give the suggestion of being creative because it's kind of remixing. But ultimately, our jobs involve trying to find interesting stories and or things that are hidden that you want to make visible, to join the dots, to find something unexpected, right? Or to have a view. Yeah, to empathize. Which none of which it can do. So
are you sure it will never be able to do?
Never say never, but I think that as humans, we always adapt, right?
Yeah.
We find a way, we find new paths around it. And so I think there will be short-term pain. It's not to say, no jobs are going to go. That won't be true. But I think it'll shake out in a way that we'll find maybe journalism will evolve. And you'll have many more sort of, it'll be much more about truth and fact, because in a world where AI can generate news, the value will be in the humans who can go out and tell you this is not fake.
Way I can generate news is so dystopian.
Exactly, but it can and it is. But so maybe the value then will be, hey, we're humans. We've gone out and verified this. This is real. You can trust us. And that will be the kind of value of humans over AI.
So, to someone listening to this chat who's not a very technical person, probably knows basic computers and all of that, how can they integrate AI into their lives, at the same time be responsible with it?
I think actually the best way to learn about the limitations and kind of get to grips with it is to use it, right? Rather than avoiding it and being scared of it. And actually, the thing about generative AI in particular, which is like ChatGPT, is what I mean, like where you're literally communicating with the chatbot. You can literally ask questions. You can just type it in regular language. That's kind of the power of it, right? So I think the first thing to do is many of these are free. Google Gemini chatbot is free. ChatGPT is free. You can do image generation with Gemini, with Midjourney. There are all these free tools I think people can use to play with it, to figure out how can this be useful to me. And I think the more you do, you start to spot the limitations yourself, where you realize it's not a search engine, it's not an encyclopedia.
It's like these people in the book sort of discovered these limitations
exactly by
by
interfacing.
using it,
Yeah.
by being involved in the process.
Exactly. And in this case, it was
By
not always
choice
by
or by
choice, but we can by choice do it, right? And then you start to see that it's making up stuff. And so however many times I write it in a story and people read it, I think the impact of you using it and finding out for yourself is much deeper, because then you kind of know as you move on what you can use it for and what it's not going to work for. So there's an example in my book of a lawyer who used it to look up cases, and he couldn't find these.
Generated random cases.
Yeah, he couldn't find the cases on Google, and he thought, oh, amazing, there are all these cases to support my point, and I couldn't even find them on Google. Put it forward, and they were just made up. And for him, he was put on trial.
What are some things that we should be on a lookout for? And what is something that AI generally gets wrong?
So
One is your fact making up stuff,
yeah,
right?
so this is what kind of in the research community or in tech companies, they call it hallucinations. But that's, I think, again, a bit misleading. Essentially, it's just fabricating stuff. And it's because, as I explained, it's predicting stuff. So it's not looking up stuff. So you can understand why, actually, as you said, this is inherent to the way it works. That's why it's great for brainstorming and idea generation, because it's a little bit wild, but it's not so great if you're trying to make a case in a court of law, because it might make up stuff. Or if you're trying to write a factual story in a newspaper where it's not okay to make up names and dates and stuff, right? So that's definitely a limitation of generative AI, and that happens in pictures too. The other one, which is common across both generative as well as the decision-making AI systems I talk about, like does somebody have tuberculosis? Does somebody have lung cancer? So in healthcare, or should somebody be given bail? Is this person going to commit a crime? Should we give this person public benefits? Is it a fraudulent application? This is something being used in Telangana, for example. They have an AI system to see if somebody is committing fraud when they are making welfare applications, to check if they're double submitting and stuff like that. So there are all these very social areas in which AI is being used to help make decisions. And there I would say, well, first there's errors, but that's true of all statistical systems, right? But the other one is bias. And this is not always in a negative way. We all have bias, right? Because we all bring with us our own lived experience through which we see the world. And AI reflects all of the perspectives and biases in the data that it's trained on. So there was a case where Amazon was using a hiring algorithm, right, to screen CVs for a job. And somehow from the previous data, it had figured out that mostly men were being hired. So even though it had been trained not to look at gender specifically, it found a way to do that as a proxy. And the way it did that was to see if you're on women's sports teams in your CV. So if there was like women's cricket or women's football, then it was screening those CVs out as a proxy for essentially
Because it
screening
learned
women.
that earlier Amazon would have rejected those.
Yeah, because it was doing more men, it was hiring more men than women. So it had found that correlation and was essentially prioritizing the same thing.
And you don't know how it made that correlation.
That's the problem. We do not understand even
It's not
today.
like somebody coded it.
Absolutely
if
not.
Women's cricket, then
No,
don't.
because that's the point. It's a dynamic learning system.
And it's learning on its own.
It's learning on its own, correlating data, and that's both its power and its weakness, right? Because it's able to find patterns that we can't, but at the same time, that's how biases creep in that we don't understand.
Mistakes that we won't.
We wouldn't, exactly, or we certainly wouldn't do it on purpose at that scale, right? And so that's
whole black box.
Exactly. And so when we talk about a black box, that's what we mean. There's no equation that tells us what it's considering or why it's doing something. And so if nobody was checking the outcome, and in the case of that Amazon hiring algorithm, it was a journalist who exposed that. It was Reuters, I think. But if that hadn't happened, there was nobody who was checking to say, oh, why are we randomly rejecting these? Are these people actually worse than these candidates? And comparing
And again, that idea of computer can't be wrong.
Exactly. So the challenges are around bias, around errors, around hallucinations, and what we need to be careful of is having humans in the loop. Making sure somebody is checking the outcome, somebody is accountable for those decisions if and when they go wrong. But it's hard because if it's a private company's tech, you don't always have access to the insides of it, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's where something like regulation can be helpful to say there needs to be transparency, or someone needs to be able to check.
Some open source platform where
Or even if it's just a regulator who has access, and if there's something like a stamp you can give it that this has safe
authorized,
outcomes.
The way we do for drugs, the way we do
Exactly.
for food.
I think that is the way that I think this will go.
And finally, I want to talk about the final section of your book where you ask 10 questions that we should ask ourselves. And that sort of reminded me of the Asimov's laws, basic laws for AI, just as Asimov did for robotics. So talk to me about those questions that we can ask ourselves.
Yeah, sure. So I really wanted something like that. I wanted something very simple.
Yeah.
You don't have to be anyone who's like a policymaker even, or a technologist to understand these.
You have to be a human.
Exactly. You just need to be human, which might be a good, like a Turing test, right? And you can ask yourself this, whether this is something that you've come across at your kid's school or at work, or if you are a policymaker, or if you happen to be a technologist, it can also apply to you. So I was looking at Asimov's laws, but also my husband is a quantum physicist, or was, and he told me about something called DiVincenzo's criteria.
Okay.
And there were these criteria that were written decades ago, which was, here's what you need to build a quantum computer. And at that time, there was no quantum. Of course, there still isn't, but those kind of criteria still remain relevant today. And I wanted something that could last over time. So I thought, for me as a journalist, the questions are the way I kind of investigate the world around me. And so these look at things like who is accountable, which human actually knows what's coming out of these systems, who should we hold, who is accountable for this, do I have an alternative? If there's an AI outcome for something, is there a human alternative I can request as a check? Things like, what should we be paying people who are helping to train and build these systems, who live in the developing world, who currently are not benefiting or profiting from this technology in the way that tech companies are, right? Or and then what about our data? How do we value that? The data that we have given away that's been used to build these systems. Who owns that? And so these are questions that I think all remain open and unanswered. But if we kind of ask ourselves every time we use these systems, it can help us shape what kind of world we want to live in. And people who are more expert than me in making laws, or running hospitals and stuff, or schools, they can use their experience to put the safety
Basically
net into
applying
place.
these questions in your specific field.
Exactly.
Right?
And you don't have to be an AI expert to do that.
You have to be human.
Yeah.
Nice. Thanks a lot for this chat, Madhumita.
Thank you.
It was a very insightful book. At first, I thought it read like a anthology of stories because it wasn't. At one point, the tech aspect of it became, came in the background, and it just was about humans at the center of it, right?
Yeah.
So thanks a lot for this. Her book, Code Dependent, is out now.
It's out now.
It's out now, and it's also longlisted for the Women's Prize.
Shortlisted.
Oh,
so
I see.
yeah,
Longlisted here.
there's been a news updates.
update.
So in the last month or so, the shortlist came out. So it's a list of 6 books that it's a part of.
Nice.
I just want as many people to read it who actually don't think that this is something they care about, because I think we divide ourselves into these, we think that, I'm a tech person and I care about tech. But this, as you've said really, really well, this is about people. So if you care about, how our lives are changing, and you want to kind of get an idea of how to grapple with those changes, this is a book for you. So I kind of want to reach as many people outside of the tech bubble as possible.
Nice. So if you are a human,
read the book. Yes.
Great. Thanks a lot for this.
Thanks for having me.
Prateek. This is Madhumita, and I'll see you in the next one.